Agnes often remembered the first time she met Delhi, and how his smile had lit up the room like dawn breaking through a cloudy night. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried himself with a confidence that made people listen when he spoke. Back then, he seemed like the man every woman dreamed of, a gentleman with ambition in his voice and promise in his eyes. He wooed her with words that sounded like poetry, promises that seemed carved from stone, and dreams of a future that glittered like diamonds in the sun. Agnes was not naive, but she was young and hopeful, and her heart leaned toward love like a flower bends toward the sun. In those days, she believed in forever, in building a home where love would reign, and in raising children in a house where joy would echo through the walls. She thought she had found not just a husband, but a partner, a man who would cherish her as deeply as she cherished him. Their courtship had been filled with warmth. Delhi was attentive, buying her thoughtful gifts, visiting her parents with respectful charm, and speaking of how he wanted a family rooted in values and legacy. Agnes saw his hunger for success and mistook it for determination that would anchor their lives. He often said, "Agnes, one day we'll have children running around our compound, boys who will carry my name far and wide." She had laughed at his words, never thinking much about his insistence on boys, assuming it was just idle talk. To her, a child was a child, a blessing in whatever form God gave. At the time, she did not see the shadows behind his dreams, shadows cast by pride and tradition, shadows that would one day turn love into a battlefield. When they finally married, Agnes felt like she had stepped into her fairy tale. Friends admired their union, family blessed their home, and neighbors looked at them as an enviable couple. In the early months, they laughed easily, spoke tenderly, and built routines that gave her hope of a lasting bond. She cooked his favorite meals, and he would praise her cooking with satisfied grins. They prayed together, planned together, and Agnes believed that in Delhi she had found her soulmate. But love, as she would soon learn, is not just measured in the moments of laughter, but in the storms of trials. And while Agnes dreamed of a home filled with children's voices and mutual affection, Delhi's mind had already fixed itself on one vision alone: a son to carry his name. That silent expectation hung in the air, a seed of pride waiting to sprout. The whispers began before Agnes even realized how deeply they cut. At family gatherings, Delhi's mother would smile at her warmly, but her words carried needles. "Agnes, may the Lord bless you with sons quickly, so our name will not fade," she would say, glancing knowingly at her relatives. The aunts would chuckle and nod, adding comments about how a woman's crown is in her male children. Though they cloaked their statements in laughter, Agnes could feel the pressure thickening around her, suffocating her joy. She wondered why they only prayed for sons, as though daughters had no place at all in the legacy of a family. But she brushed it aside, believing that once she bore a child, all would be well. Delhi himself never directly scolded her, but his words betrayed the desire buried in his heart. He would talk endlessly about how his father's only son, himself, was the pillar of the family name, and how important it was for him to produce a male heir. "Agnes," he would say, "my father always told me a man who cannot produce a son has failed. I cannot fail him. I cannot fail our family." His tone was not angry but firm, like a declaration carved into stone. Agnes listened, torn between the love she had for her husband and the dread that began to creep into her soul. What if her first child was not a boy? Would he look at her with disappointment? Would her love and devotion no longer be enough? When she finally became pregnant, Agnes glowed with happiness, believing this would be the turning point that would seal their love forever. Yet she could not silence the voices around her. Neighbors who knew of her condition often said, "May it be a boy this time, so your husband will rejoice." Women she barely knew would touch her stomach and whisper, "Pray for a son." Agnes wanted to shout that any child was a blessing, but she held her peace, choosing instead to pray quietly at night. "Lord," she whispered, "give me the strength to endure. Whether boy or girl, let my child be loved." She had no idea how prophetic her prayer would become. The day Tonia was born was the happiest of Agnes's life. She held the tiny baby in her arms, overwhelmed by the miracle of life, and tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "My angel, my gift, my everything." Tonia's little fingers curled around her mother's. Her cry filled the room, and to Agnes, the world seemed complete. She thought surely Deli would share her joy, that the sight of their daughter would melt his heart into pure tenderness. For a moment, he did smile, holding the baby carefully and admiring her soft skin. But even in that moment of new life, Agnes caught a flicker in his eyes, a fleeting shadow of disappointment that chilled her. The congratulatory visits began, and with them came the silent judgments. "She is beautiful," Deli's relatives said politely. "But don't worry, next one will be a boy." Some even said it outright. "Agnes, you must try again quickly. We need sons." Agnes smiled through their remarks, though each word landed like a stone on her heart. She watched Deli's expressions carefully, hoping he would defend their child, but he only nodded quietly, as though agreeing that Tonia was not enough. Her joy became bittersweet, her happiness tangled with fear. Would she spend her life proving the worth of her daughter? Despite the world's whispers, Agnes poured her entire soul into loving Tonia. She rocked her to sleep with songs, whispered prayers over her crib, and kissed her tiny forehead 100 times a day. To her, Tonia was not just a daughter. She was a promise, a living testimony that God had answered her prayers. She refused to let her child feel like a burden. But deep inside, a seed of dread grew. She had seen how culture and ego could twist a man's heart. She prayed Deli would rise above it, that he would love Tonia unconditionally. But Deli's silence was louder than any words, and Agnes knew the storm had only just begun. It began subtly, like a poison seeping into water. Deli no longer looked at Tonia with the tender affection he had shown in the first days. Instead, he held her awkwardly, almost reluctantly, as though she was a reminder of something he lacked. He began to avoid conversations about the baby, often turning the topic toward his dreams of the son who would come next. When friends visited, he would laugh about how he was still waiting for his boy, and speak of legacy as if the daughter sleeping in the other room did not exist. Agnes's heart ached at these small dismissals, but she kept hoping time would soften him. As Tonia grew, Agnes noticed how Deli became restless and irritable. His pride, once masked as ambition, turned into an unquenchable hunger for validation. His friends teased him, saying things like, "Deli, you are too much of a man to only have girls. Don't tell me your wife has failed you." Laughter would follow, rough and cutting. At first, Deli brushed them off, but with each comment, his pride flared. He began to internalize their words until they became his truth. At home, his silence became distance, and his distance became coldness. Agnes tried to bridge the gap, to remind him of the love they once shared, but his heart seemed locked behind iron bars. When Agnes confronted him one evening about his growing indifference, Deli's response cut her deeply. "Agnes," he said sharply, "you don't understand. A man without a son is nothing in this world. You've given me a daughter, yes, but who will carry my name? Who will stand as my heir? Do you expect me to be content with this?" His words stung like fire. Agnes wanted to scream that children are not trophies, that daughters are no less valuable than sons, but her throat tightened with pain. That night, as she lay beside Tonia's crib, she realized that Deli's love was conditional, rooted not in the beauty of family, but in the shallow soil of ego. Deli's frustration soon birthed a dangerous shift. What began as dissatisfaction turned into reckless indulgence. He started coming home late, smelling of alcohol and perfume, his excuses flimsy and unapologetic. Agnes knew what was happening, knew he was seeking solace in the arms of other women, but each time she confronted him, his arrogance grew. "I am a man," he would sneer, "and I have rights. If my wife cannot give me a son, another woman will. Don't question me." His entitlement was a dagger, slicing away at the fragile fabric of their marriage. Agnes bore the humiliation in silence, not because she lacked strength, but because of the tiny girl who slept peacefully each night, unaware of the storm brewing in her home. She refused to let Tonia grow up in bitterness, and so she swallowed her tears and tried to shield her daughter from the chaos. Neighbors whispered about Deli's escapades, and even in church, Agnes could feel the stares. Yet she clung to her faith, whispering prayers into the darkness. Lord, give me wisdom. Give me strength to endure. Show me the way when I cannot see the road ahead. She did not yet know that her prayers were being answered in ways she could not yet understand. Deli's ego grew unchecked, fueled by his conquests, and the false validation of shallow friends. He paraded women as if daring Agnes to protest, certain she would never leave because society taught women to endure. But in his arrogance, he underestimated her strength, her quiet resilience, and the power of the God she served. The marriage that had once been her dream was now crumbling, but Agnes refused to let despair consume her. She clung to Tonia, the very child Deli rejected, as her anchor. And while Deli strayed down the path of pride and destruction, Agnes's journey toward purpose was quietly beginning, though neither of them knew how drastically their lives were about to change. The evening it happened, the atmosphere in the house was thick with tension, like a storm waiting to break. Deli came home reeking of alcohol, his shirt half-buttoned, his face a mixture of arrogance and exhaustion. Agnes sat quietly in the living room, Tonia asleep in her tiny cot beside her. She had grown used to his late arrivals, but tonight something about his energy unsettled her. His eyes were wild, his steps unsteady, and the moment he set his gaze on her, she knew he was looking for a fight. Agnes, he spat, I am done with this nonsense. Done with you, done with this child who has brought me nothing but shame. How long do you expect me to wait for a son? How long do you expect me to sit in this house mocked by my friends because all you could give me was a daughter? His words tore at her heart like claws, leaving wounds that no bandage could cover. She clutched her wrapper tighter around her, shielding herself from the venom in his voice, but her silence only seemed to enrage him further. When she tried to respond, her words trembling on her lips, Deli's voice rose like thunder. Don't speak. Don't you dare speak to me about love or blessings. A real man needs a son, and if you cannot give me that, then you are of no use to me. Do you hear me, Agnes? No use. His fist slammed against the table, startling Tonia from her sleep. The little girl's cry pierced the air, and Agnes instinctively rushed to comfort her, shielding her tiny body with her own. The sight of them together seemed to infuriate Deli more, as though the bond between mother and daughter was an insult to his fragile pride. He staggered toward them, pointing a trembling finger. Get out of my house. Tonight. Take that girl and leave. I will find another woman, a real woman, who can give me what you cannot. His words echoed in the room, final and unyielding, the verdict of a man blinded by ego. Agnes's legs trembled as she gathered what little she could carry, a small bag, a wrapper, and her sleeping child strapped to her back. She looked around the home she had built, the home she thought would be her safe haven, and realized it was no longer hers. Her tears fell freely, but her dignity remained intact. She did not beg, she did not plead. Instead, she whispered to her child, Don't worry, my angel. God will make a way for us. As she stepped into the night, the cool air slapped her face, and the darkness seemed to swallow her whole. She had no destination, no money, no support. Yet, in that moment of despair, she felt something stir within her, a strength she did not know she had. Deli believed he had cast her away in shame, but what he had truly done was release her into the hands of destiny. The streets were unervingly silent as Agnes walked, the sound of her footsteps blending with the distant barking of dogs and the hum of crickets. Tonia whimpered softly on her back, her small fingers gripping the fabric of her mother's wrapper. Agnes's heart broke as she realized she had no destination. Her mind raced with questions. Where will I go? Who will take us in? How will I care for my child? Yet beneath the fear, there was a quiet voice whispering in her spirit. You are not alone. With each step, she whispered prayers, her tears mingling with the dust beneath her feet. Lord, show me the way. Do not let my child suffer. Do not let her pay for the sins of her father's pride. The night seemed endless, each corner darker than the last, yet Agnes pressed forward, her faith the only light guiding her path. Her body ached with exhaustion, but she would not stop. Every time she thought of Deli's words, useless, failure, no son, her chest tightened with pain. But then she would look at Tonia, feel the warmth of her tiny body, and remember why she could not give up. That child was not a mistake. She was not a burden. She was the very reason Agnes had to survive. She walked past houses where lights flickered behind curtains, families laughing and eating supper, and her heart ached at the contrast. She was homeless now, cast out like refuse, while others enjoyed the warmth of companionship. Still, she refused to knock on any door. Pride, dignity, and a strange sense of hope kept her moving. At last, her weary steps brought her to the gates of the small church she had attended with Deli in happier times. The compound was quiet, but a faint light glowed from the parsonage nearby. Desperation overcame hesitation, and she knocked softly on the door. After a moment, the door creaked open, revealing Mama Esther, the pastor's wife, her face etched with surprise and concern. "Agnes," she whispered, taking in the sight of her disheveled clothes, tear-stained face, and the child on her back. Without waiting for explanation, Mama Esther pulled her inside, her embrace warm and strong. "You will not cry alone tonight," she said firmly. For the first time since leaving Deli's house, Agnes felt a sliver of safety. She collapsed into the arms of kindness, and though the tears did not stop, they no longer fell into the void. The following morning, Agnes awoke to the sound of birds chirping outside the small guest room where she and Tonia had slept. For the first time in weeks, she had slept without fear of being insulted or abandoned. Mama Esther entered with a gentle smile, carrying a tray of food. "Eat, my daughter. You need strength for yourself and for this little one." The kindness in her voice nearly broke Agnes again, for she was unaccustomed to such tenderness. As she ate, she recounted the events of the previous night, her voice breaking as she told of Deli's rejection, his obsession with the son, and his decision to cast her out. Mama Esther listened without judgment, her eyes filled with compassion. "Agnes, men may reject you, but God does not. And as for this child, she is not your shame. She is your blessing. Hold on to her, for she will be the light that guides your steps." Over the next few days, Agnes began helping around the church, doing small chores to repay the kindness she had received. She cleaned, cooked, and soon found herself spending time in the nursery where the church cared for young children during services. It was there that something inside her began to awaken. She discovered a patience, a gift for calming restless toddlers, for teaching simple songs, for making the children laugh. Parents who came to pick up their little ones often marveled at how their children clung to Agnes, and Mama Esther noticed it too. "You have a gift, my daughter," she said one afternoon. "A gift for nurturing. Perhaps God is leading you towards something greater." Agnes smiled faintly, not daring to believe that her shattered life could hold any new purpose. Yet the spark had been lit. At night, as she watched Tonia sleep beside her, Agnes reflected on her new reality. She had nothing of her former life, no house, no husband, no wealth, but she had peace in this shelter, something she had not felt in years. Deli's voice of condemnation no longer echoed as loudly, drowned out by the laughter of the children and the gentle encouragement of Mama Esther. Slowly, hope began to stitch itself into the torn fabric of her heart. She began to dream again, not of a perfect marriage or a son to appease tradition, but of building a life where her daughter would thrive, where love and acceptance would be her foundation. She did not know how or when, but she began to believe that her story was not ending. It was only beginning. As the weeks turned into months, Agnes found herself deeply involved in the church nursery. She woke early each morning, tending to Tonia, preparing meals, and then hurrying to the church compound to help with the children. What had begun as an act of gratitude soon became a passion. She found joy in teaching the little ones how to recite the alphabet, guiding their small hands as they colored pictures, and singing songs that made them giggle. Each day, she discovered new depths of patience and creativity within herself. The children adored her, often calling her Auntie Agnes, and running to her with open arms. The parents noticed too, praising her natural ability and kindness. For Agnes, it was as though God was slowly rewriting the story of her life, replacing pain with purpose. Mama Esther continued to encourage her, often speaking words that lifted her spirit. Agnes, I see a teacher in you. You have what many do not, a heart that truly cares for children. Do not bury this gift. Nurture it, and it will open doors you cannot imagine. At first, Agnes hesitated. She had lost confidence in herself after years of being belittled and rejected. But Mama Esther refused to let her hide. One day, she introduced Agnes to a philanthropist visiting the church, a woman who ran an NGO for education. After hearing Agnes's story and observing her with the children, the philanthropist was moved. I believe in you, she said. If you're willing, I will sponsor you to complete a professional course in early childhood education. Agnes's heart raced, tears streaming down her face as she accepted. For the first time in years, she felt the hand of God moving tangibly in her life. That night, Agnes held Tonia close, whispering into her daughter's ear, My love, we may have been cast aside, but see how God is raising us again. You are not a curse. You are the reason I have found my path. One day, this world will know your name, for you are the light that guided me out of darkness. Tonia, too young to understand, only smiled and snuggled into her mother's chest. But Agnes knew her words were prophetic. From the ashes of her rejection, a new vision was taking shape, one where she would not only provide for her daughter, but also create a legacy far greater than Deli's ego could ever imagine. The journey into education was not easy. Agnes juggled her studies with motherhood, often staying up late into the night to read, while Tonia slept peacefully by her side. During the day, she attended classes, absorbing everything she could about child psychology, early learning methods, and classroom management. There were days when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her, days when the weight of her responsibilities made her want to give up. But every time she looked at her daughter, she found new strength. Tonia was her motivation, her reminder that giving up was not an option. She whispered to herself, If I fail, then my daughter suffers. If I succeed, then my daughter rises with me. Her professors quickly noticed her diligence and passion. Though she was older than many of her classmates, she stood out for her maturity and genuine love for children. She became known for her innovative ideas, simple teaching methods that made learning fun and engaging. Some of her classmates struggled to keep up, but Agnes excelled, her resilience shining through. She began to dream bigger, imagining not just working for others, but one day running her own daycare center. The thought scared her, but it also excited her. It was a seed planted deep in her heart, one that would soon grow beyond her wildest dreams. When she finally graduated, Mama Esther and the philanthropist who had sponsored her organized a small celebration. Parents from the church brought gifts. Children ran around joyfully, and Tonia clapped her little hands, shouting, Mommy, Mommy. Agnes stood before them, overwhelmed with gratitude. She had walked through fire and emerged not broken, but stronger. The door that Deli had slammed in her face had led her to another, one that opened to a new future. And though she did not know it yet, that future would shine so brightly that even the man who had rejected her would one day stand in tears before the woman he once cast aside. The transition into her new life was anything but smooth. Agnes quickly discovered that building herself anew meant living every day in a state of tension, balancing motherhood, studies, and the work she did to keep food on the table. There were mornings she would rise before dawn, cooking porridge for Tonia and dressing her for the day, before rushing off to her classes with barely enough time to breathe. Her classmates often noticed the tired lines under her eyes, but they never saw the weight she carried in her heart, the memory of rejection, the constant fear of failure, and the unyielding determination not to let her daughter suffer because of a father's pride. At night, she would sit by the dim light of a kerosene lamp, her books spread before her, while Tonia lay asleep on a mat nearby. Her eyelids would grow heavy, her head would bob with fatigue, yet every time she thought of putting her pen down, She would glance at her daughter's small figure and whisper to herself, "I cannot stop. I must finish this." For her, there were times when money was scarce and she had to make painful sacrifices. Sometimes it meant skipping meals so that Tonia would have enough to eat. Other times it meant working late into the night at the church, scrubbing floors, or helping Mama Esther with endless tasks, simply to repay the kindness she had been shown. Yet, in all this hardship, there was a sense of dignity in her struggle. For the first time in her life, Agnes felt she was not simply existing to please a man or uphold someone else's expectations. She was carving a path for herself and her daughter. Each day was a test, each success a small victory, and though the burden was heavy, she carried it with grace. Her professors often praised her discipline, her classmates began to respect her resilience, and even strangers were inspired by the way she handled herself with quiet strength. But beneath the daily grind, there was also growth happening in her heart. Agnes began to realize that her pain had given birth to a fire she never knew she possessed. She was no longer the timid wife who had tolerated humiliation in silence. She was becoming a woman forged by trials, sharpened by suffering, and strengthened by faith. The balancing act of studies, work, and motherhood was not breaking her, it was transforming her. And though she often cried silently into her pillow, she never allowed despair to consume her. Instead, she allowed her tears to water the seeds of a destiny that was slowly taking root. Every evening, after the weight of the day had settled and Tonia's little voice had gone quiet in sleep, Agnes would kneel by her bedside and pray. These prayers were not always elegant or long, but they were fierce, desperate, and filled with the raw honesty of a woman who had nothing left to lean on but God. "Lord," she whispered, "I may not have riches, I may not have a husband who loves me, but I have this child. Protect her, bless her, and let her never feel unwanted. Let her never know the sting of rejection that I have known. If the world looks at her as less because she is not a son, let me raise her to see herself as more than enough." Tears often stained the mat as she spoke, but in those moments her spirit felt lighter, her burdens shared with a God she believed was listening. Tonia, though too young to understand, was shaped by those prayers. She grew into a bright, cheerful child, her laughter filling the small room they shared, her smile reminding Agnes that life still held beauty despite the scars. Agnes taught her little lessons each day: how to say thank you, how to fold her tiny hands in prayer before meals, how to sing songs of hope. Whenever Tonia would ask, "Mommy, where is Daddy?" Agnes's heart would ache, but she would answer gently, "Your daddy is far away, but you have a Father in heaven who loves you more than anything." She refused to poison her daughter's heart with bitterness, choosing instead to plant seeds of faith and dignity. Those nightly prayers became the anchor of their lives. They kept Agnes from collapsing under the weight of despair. They gave her courage to keep pushing forward, and they built an invisible shield around Tonia's tender heart. In those quiet hours, Agnes was not just a mother begging for help. She was a warrior interceding for her child's future. And though she did not yet see the results, heaven was recording every word, preparing a harvest that would one day leave even Delhi trembling in awe. The day Agnes graduated from her program was a turning point, but it was not the certificate that changed her life. It was the vision that came with it. As she stood in her modest gown, holding her diploma in trembling hands, she felt a spark ignite inside her. She was no longer just surviving. She was equipped to build something new. That night, as she and Tonia sat in their small room eating roasted yam, Agnes began to sketch ideas on a piece of paper. "Tonia," she said with a soft smile, "one day we will have a place of our own. A place where children like you will come to learn, laugh, and grow. And I will call it Tonia's Haven." The little girl giggled, not fully understanding, but Agnes's heart swelled with determination. She started small. With Mama Esther's encouragement, she rented a single room and filled it with mats, colorful posters, and a few toys donated by kind church members. At first, only 2 parents entrusted their children to her care, but Agnes poured her whole heart into those little ones, treating them as though they were her own. She taught them songs, basic counting, and simple prayers, and soon word spread of her patience and skill. More parents began to bring their children, amazed by how quickly they learned and how happily they returned home. Agnes worked tirelessly, cleaning the space at dawn, teaching through the day, and preparing lessons at night. It was exhausting, but it was hers, a dream born out of ashes, a testimony that rejection does not mean the end. Slowly, the room became too small for the number of children coming in. With the little income she earned, Agnes rented another room, expanding her daycare into a modest but vibrant learning center. She painted the walls herself, decorated with bright colors, and named it boldly, Tonia's Haven, where every child matters. Each letter on that signboard carried weight, defying the very words Deli had once used to strip her worth. The same daughter he had dismissed as not enough was now the inspiration behind a dream that was growing beyond their imagination. Within a year, Tonia's Haven became the talk of the community. Parents marveled at how their children blossomed under Agnes's care, learning not just academics, but manners, respect, and confidence. The daycare's reputation spread beyond the neighborhood, drawing families from farther away who wanted their children in her hands. Soon, she had to hire assistants, young women she trained carefully, instilling in them the same values of patience, love, and discipline. The once small rented room was now a bustling center of laughter, song, and learning. And at the center of it all stood Agnes, radiant with purpose, her once broken spirit now clothed in dignity. Financially, things improved as well. For the first time in her life, Agnes could provide comfortably for her daughter. She bought Tonia new clothes, better food, and even enrolled her in extracurricular activities. The little girl thrived, her intelligence shining, her confidence growing. Agnes often looked at her and thought, "You are not just my child. You are my destiny." Whenever she saw Tonia laughing with the other children, her heart swelled with pride. She knew then that her prayers had been answered in ways she had never imagined. What Deli had seen as a curse, God had turned into the very foundation of her breakthrough. But success did not erase the scars of the past. There were nights Agnes lay awake, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. She thought of the humiliation she endured, the rejection that nearly broke her, and the endless tears she shed in silence. Yet, she no longer felt bitterness toward Deli. Instead, she felt gratitude, for without his rejection, she might never have discovered her strength or her calling. What had once been her greatest wound was now her greatest testimony. And though she did not yet know it, this blossoming success would soon bring her face to face with the very man who had once cast her out. While Agnes was rising, Deli was falling. His life, once fueled by pride and ego, began to unravel piece by piece. The women he had chased after, the ones he had claimed would give him a son, proved to be fleeting companions who cared only for his money and status. Some drained his pockets, others mocked him when they realized his desperation. None gave him the air he so desperately craved. With each failed relationship his bitterness grew, but instead of facing his own flaws, he drowned himself further in alcohol and reckless living. The proud man who once laughed with friends about his rights now sat alone in bars, his reputation tarnished, his laughter hollow. At work, his performance suffered. He lost contracts, missed deadlines, and clashed with colleagues who no longer respected him. The whispers that once fueled his arrogance now turned into scorn. People who once envied him began to pity him, and those who had mocked him for not having a son now mocked him for losing control of his life entirely. His home, once filled with Agnes's warmth and Tonia's laughter, became a cold, silent place. Dust gathered on unused furniture, the walls echoed with emptiness, and even his own family began to distance themselves, ashamed of what he had become. Deli often sat alone in the darkness of his house, haunted by memories. He remembered the day he threw Agnes out, her tear-filled eyes, her whispered promise to her daughter that God would make a way. At the time he had felt powerful, victorious, convinced he was reclaiming his manhood by casting aside the useless woman. But now, sitting in silence, he realized those were empty victories. He had not gained a son, he had not found happiness, he had not built a legacy. Instead, he had lost the very thing that mattered most, a family. And though his pride still resisted, regret began to gnaw at him, preparing him for the moment when fate would force him to face the woman he had underestimated. The silence in Delhi's house grew heavier with each passing day. What had once been a lively home, filled with Agnes's careful touches, the scent of her cooking, and the sound of little Tonia's laughter, was now a barren shell of memories. He returned each night to darkness, no one waiting at the door, no voice to ask how his day had been. The walls, once adorned with photographs Agnes had lovingly placed, seemed to mock him with their emptiness. He often found himself staring at the chair where Agnes used to sit, or the small corner where Tonia's toys once lay scattered, and the weight of loneliness pressed on his chest until he could barely breathe. He had believed throwing them out would give him peace, but all it had brought was a cavernous silence that devoured him. Nights were the worst. Delhi would sit with a bottle of liquor, staring into the shadows, trying to drown the voice of regret that whispered relentlessly in his ear. He told himself he was still a man, that he would yet find a woman who could bear him a son, but each fling ended in disappointment and shame. Some women laughed openly at his desperation, others left after draining what little money he had left. He had squandered his dignity, his wealth, and his peace in pursuit of an ego that had betrayed him. Even his own family grew weary of him. His mother, once proud of her son, now sighed in sorrow whenever his name was mentioned, and his siblings kept their distance, unwilling to be dragged into the chaos he had created. Yet, despite the emptiness, Delhi could not bring himself to admit his fault. Pride was still his master, though it now held him like a prisoner in chains. He clung to the belief that Agnes had been the one who failed him, that his downfall was somehow her fault, even though deep down he knew the truth. And so, he sat each night in his lonely house, surrounded by silence, haunted by memories of the family he had cast aside, and tormented by the realization that no matter how many women he pursued, no matter how much he drank, the void inside him only grew larger. It was on one of those long, lonely nights that Delhi finally saw himself clearly. He had been drinking again, the half-empty bottle of gin sweating on the table beside him, when his gaze fell upon a cracked mirror on the wall. The man staring back at him was not the confident, ambitious Delhi of years past. His eyes were bloodshot, his skin had lost its glow, his once muscular frame had softened under the weight of indulgence and neglect. He leaned closer, studying his reflection, and for the first time, he admitted to himself that he was broken. "What have I become?" he muttered, his voice hoarse with despair. The words hung in the air like a confession, and with them came a flood of memories. Agnes's gentle smile, Tonia's innocent laughter, the warmth of a home built with love. Tears he had long suppressed welled up in his eyes. He remembered the night he had cast them out, the look in Agnes's eyes as she clutched their daughter, the tremor in her voice as she whispered to the child that God would make a way. At the time, he had felt powerful, victorious, certain he had rid himself of weakness. But now, in the quiet of his solitude, he realized he had thrown away his greatest treasures. The son he had sought so desperately had never come, while the daughter he had rejected had been the one gift he was truly blessed with. His ego had blinded him, his entitlement had led him astray, and now he stood alone, stripped of everything that gave life meaning. As the tears streamed down his face, Delhi fell to his knees, the bottle clattering to the floor. For the first time in years, he prayed, not for a son, not for wealth, but for forgiveness. "God," he whispered, his voice breaking, "I have been a fool. I have destroyed my own home. I have wounded the woman who loved me. I have rejected the child you gave me. Have mercy on me. Give me another chance, not to prove I am a man, but to be a father." It was a prayer born of desperation, a cry from a man finally facing the ruins of his pride. And though he did not know it yet, that prayer was the beginning of his road to redemption. Fate has a way of bringing people back to the places they once abandoned, and for Delhi, it came in the most unexpected way. One Saturday morning, he went to the market to buy food, though even the act of cooking for himself reminded him of all he had lost. As he walked through the busy stalls, he noticed a crowd gathered near the entrance of a new building. Curious, he drew closer, and what he saw froze him in place. A brightly painted sign read, "Tonia's Haven, where every child matters." Children in neat uniforms were laughing and singing as they distributed flyers. Parents stood chatting about the excellence of the school, and at the center of it all was a woman he recognized instantly. Agnes. She looked radiant, more beautiful than he remembered, her face glowing with confidence, her movements purposeful as she guided children and spoke warmly with parents. And beside her, holding a stack of flyers with a bright smile, was Tonia. No longer the helpless toddler he had dismissed, she was now a vibrant girl, her eyes shining with joy as she handed papers to passers-by. Deli's chest tightened as he realized what he was seeing. The wife he had called useless, the daughter he had rejected, were now thriving without him. The school bore his daughter's name, and the very child he had once seen as a curse had become the inspiration for something that was changing lives. He stood rooted to the spot, tears burning his eyes, his pride collapsing under the weight of reality. People around him praised Agnes's work. Parents spoke of how their children loved the school, and others admired her strength as a single mother. Deli felt as though the ground beneath him had crumbled. His world spun as he realized the magnitude of his folly. The child he had cast aside was not only enough, she was extraordinary. And the woman he had humiliated had risen from the ashes stronger, brighter, and more powerful than he had ever imagined. His heart broke with regret, and he knew he could no longer hide. He had to face them. With trembling steps, Deli approached. His voice cracked as he called out, "Agnes." "Tonia." The sound of his voice startled them both. Tonia turned first, her small eyes widening in recognition. She tilted her head, her little lips parting in confusion. "Mommy," she whispered, tugging at Agnes's wrapper. "Is that my daddy?" Agnes turned slowly, her gaze falling on Deli. For a long moment, silence stretched between them, filled with years of pain, regret, and unspoken words. Deli's body shook as tears streamed down his face. He raised his hand slightly, as if surrendering, his pride stripped away. "Agnes," he choked, "I was a fool. I let my ego destroy everything. I chased shadows, I dishonored you, I rejected our daughter. And now, seeing both of you," his voice broke, and he sobbed openly in the marketplace, uncaring of who was watching. Tonia looked up at her mother, her young mind trying to make sense of the scene. Agnes knelt beside her, brushing her daughter's cheek gently. "Yes, my love," she said softly, "this is your father. But remember, a true father is not just the one who gives you life. It is the one who chooses to love you." Her words were calm, dignified, filled with the quiet strength of a woman who had healed. She looked at Deli, then, her eyes firm but not unkind. "I forgave you long ago, Deli, but I cannot return to the woman I once was. I built this life for our daughter, and I will not let her suffer because of your mistakes. If you want to be in her life, you must start with humility, not entitlement." Deli fell to his knees, clutching his chest as though the weight of his sins was crushing him. "Please," he begged, "let me be your father. I will do anything. I do not deserve it, but I cannot live knowing I have lost her completely." The crowd around them watched in silence, some moved to tears by the rawness of the scene. For the first time, Deli was no longer the arrogant man demanding his rights. He was a broken father, weeping for the daughter he had once cast aside. And though the road ahead would not erase the past, a door had been opened, one that offered him a chance to redeem himself, if only he had the courage to walk through it. That day marked a turning point for all of them, though not in the way Deli had once imagined. Agnes did not take him back as her husband, nor did she allow the past to dictate her future. Instead, she extended to him the chance to prove himself, not through empty promises or prideful declarations, but through consistent, humble actions as a father. Deli visited Tonia often, slowly building a relationship with her. At first, she was shy, hesitant to trust the man who had been absent, but with time, she began to warm to him. Agnes watched cautiously, protecting her daughter, but also silently praying that Deli would truly change. She no longer loved him as she once did, but she wished for Tonia to know her father, if only so she would never grow up feeling unwanted. For Deli, the journey was painful but necessary. Each time he saw Tonia smile at him, each time she held his hand or called him daddy, he felt both joy and sorrow. The joy of having a second chance, and the sorrow of knowing how much he had missed. He poured himself into rebuilding trust, into showing his daughter that she was precious beyond measure. And though Agnes kept her distance emotionally, he respected her boundaries, understanding now that her strength was not something to be taken for granted. He had lost her as a wife, but he had gained the opportunity to be the father he should have been all along. Agnes, on her part, flourished. Tonia's Haven grew into one of the most respected schools in the community, and her story inspired countless women who had been told they were not enough. She stood as a testimony that rejection is not the end, but the beginning of destiny. And every time she looked at her daughter, she whispered the same words she had prayed on the night Deli threw them out. "Don't worry, my angel. God will make a way." That way had been made, not just for her and Tonia, but even for Deli, who now knew the true meaning of manhood was not in producing a son, but in loving the child you are given. The past could not be undone, but the future had been rewritten. And though their roads were now different, they all walked forward, wounded, but wiser, broken, but rebuilt, lost once, but now found. Please share, like, and subscribe. Your support means the world to us. Thank you for watching to the end. Don't forget to come back for the next amazing tale yet.